Okay, we're talking today about functional repertoires, but before we do, I want to remind you that this webinar is hosted by Florida Atlantic University Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, PEPSA, Partnership for Effective Programs for Students with Autism. FAU Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, CARD, provides expert consulting, training, and support at no charge for all people across all race, ethnic, and gender groups with autism and related disabilities, their families, employers, the professionals, and community and governmental agencies serving them. FAU CARD provides support and assistance with the goal of optimizing the potential of all people across all race, ethnic, and gender groups with autism and related disabilities. CARD serves 5 counties, including Indian River, St. Lucie, Martin, Okeechobee, Palm Beach, out of 3 offices in Boca Raton, Jupiter, Port St. Lucie, and they provide 1 dynamic service. Among the services offered at no charge are family and school consultations, trainings and workshops, public education, referrals and resources, adult hangout groups, and much more. Okay, getting into today's presentation. Functional repertoires. Most people think of functional as the basic daily living activities like dressing, washing hands, wiping tables, folding clothes. Those obviously are some examples of it. They're not wrong to think of those as functional, but sometimes that comes with a negative connotation of thinking that functional repertoires are only things that mean we're not working on academics. And I'd like to help dispel that, that notion. In part of my goal of doing so, I would like to broaden your understanding of the meaning of functional, the way I see what functional means. A functional repertoire is something that a learner performs the necessary skills with only natural supports, those things that would naturally be there, under the challenges presented by the real world and maintained by natural consequences. That's a mouthful, but I'll give you one sort of quick example. A kid who, he was older at this time, he was like 16, and I was teaching him to make microwave pizza, and it took some time to get this, but he did like microwave pizza, so that helped. So along the way, thought, you know, he's doing pretty well. He's setting the microwave, putting the pizza in, taking the pizza out, doing a little bit of the cutting of the pizza, getting the plate, having a towel, all of that. But then what I noticed was that we set it up by us getting the pizza out of the freezer and putting the pizza over there near where the microwave was and opening the box. So then he was just taking it out of the box and putting it in the microwave and doing that. So he wasn't encountering natural real world challenges, and he had unnatural levels of supports. We were engineering that environment generously to help him get started. We weren't wrong, we just weren't done, right? The good news is the making the pizza was maintained by the natural consequence of eating the pizza. So it was on its way to being functional. Sometimes with some learners, we're not going to achieve exactly those criteria of that sort of idealistic sight of what functional is. The way independent functioning adults are in a community. We can drive ourselves to the store to get what we need and have the funds and handle everything basically on an average day. So if our learner is not going to be able to respond to strictly natural supports, you know, the would be a good example of a natural support here. The side of the paper towels where they are. Once you wash your hands and you need to dry them, you see where the paper towels are, they're in their natural place where they always are, and you go over there and you get those. That's a natural support, it's just there. An unnatural support would be a picture schedule showing, okay, you've washed your hands, now the next thing is to look at the next thing on the schedule, oh, dry your hands, that's the next thing. That's an unnatural support. In some circumstances, if we're not going to be able to have our learners' skills depend solely upon natural supports, then we might need to add some unnatural ones. And this fits broadly under the category of what's called engineering an environment. where we have this is the place for that, and here's a cue here's a visual support or cue that helps you, okay, get from A to B. There you are. Now this environment is set up so that you know where these things are, right? This kind of stuff lends extra predictability above that afforded by a truly natural environment. Okay. In John's case, the same guy with the pizza, now we have like cleaning some bathrooms, and we have the same cleaning supplies in the same location in each bathroom every time. So there isn't searching and stuff like that involved. There is something I'll probably come back to a few times throughout today's webinar regarding the difference between socially mediated prompting and non-socially mediated prompting. So our kid, let's say, needs to get from A to B. He needs to, it's time to vacuum his room. Okay, good. So it's time to vacuum his room. What's his cue to do that? Does he know where the vacuum is? Are we directing him socially? We saying, your vacuum's over here, or it's time to vacuum, come on and get the vacuum cleaner. That's a socially mediated support, right? So mom's going to do that differently than dad does, differently than an ABA therapist will do it. And that variability can sometimes be problematic for consistency of responding for our kid's success. Whereas if we taught the kid this picture of the vacuum, when that's there, that means vacuum your room. And you know you can take that picture of the vacuum to the closet that has the vacuum in it. You can put that picture outside, the Velcro to the outside of the door and open it. There you go. That's where your vacuum is. Now you have the vacuum in your hand. You can handle the rest of it from here. You already know what to do. That would be non-socially mediated. Once we've done some of that pre-teaching, some of that other work to teach, the picture means, go to this closet, get the vacuum, like that. It's, as a general rule, when we're working towards functional repertoires, getting to non-socially mediated is preferable over socially mediated. Here's some other variables that help distinguish functional repertoires from non-functional repertoires. A functional repertoire is spontaneous. We as adults go to the bathroom when we feel the need to go, as a general rule, right? Non-functional would be prompt dependent at some level, waiting to be told to go to the bathroom, going to the bathroom on a schedule, right? That's just based on 90 minutes have passed. That's not based on the feeling of pressure in the bladder, which is a very natural stimulus to feel. A functional repertoire is also fast enough for the real world. When we are interacting with other moving parts, or we're interacting with people as part of a functional repertoire. I love the example of going through a line at the grocery store. People will take their time at some level with you, but we don't want it to be several minutes for you to get bills out of your wallet or to use your card. We want that to be fairly timely fashion to make it functional. And non-functional is too slow for the real world. Functional, ideally, functional repertoires lead to natural reinforcers. Okay, that could be something as mundane as John's pizza, which is, I'll get to later. This is part of how we pick some of our targets. We already know you like pizza. You don't yet make your own pizza. So maybe we should teach you to make your own pizza because you're going to like the outcome, right? That's a good opportunity for us to teach, just like getting your trunks on for the pool. And non-functional repertoires would tend to rely upon contrived reinforcers. When a repertoire is functional, a learner is able to resist distraction. All right, you were making your pizza and a dog barked somewhere, or something happened somewhere, somebody walked through, and you were still able to make your pizza. You weren't lost following this new event. And the non-functional is vulnerable to distraction. Functional repertoires generalize to novel exemplars. All right, so putting on one shirt correctly, you can put on multiple shirts correctly. Great. You can put on multiple pairs of pants correctly. Whereas if it's restricted to only the explicitly taught exemplars, it's not yet functional. So which of these are quote unquote functional? Billy spontaneously washes his hands before snack. Of course, I had to write these rather short. I couldn't write you a 25-word description. I'm going to call that functional because I use the word spontaneously. He needs his hands clean for snack. He may have sort of memorized this, or teachers may have taught him over the past several weeks. First through direction. Ooh, what do you have to wash your hands if you want to have the snack. And then through indirect verbal prompts of some kind. What do you have to do before you have your snack? Challenging Billy to remember, oh, wash my hands, because that's been for the last 3 weeks straight. I have to wash my hands before snack, until eventually he sees that we're starting to get ready for snack and he spontaneously washes his hands. Great, that's functional. Lewis sweeps the floor with moderate support. I put that in short terms there, moderate support. I will call that non-functional because he still needs support with it. Hopefully we're on our way to functional. Presumably also, if Lewis is like most of the kids I've worked with, he doesn't really care all that much whether the floor is clean, right? He might be doing that for some other kind of reason, like the floor has to be clean before we can all transition to recess or something like that. So I'll talk a little bit later about how to contrive motivation for kids to value things they wouldn't otherwise value, like that. Okay, another example. Karen follows a picture sequence to make herself a sandwich. A little bit trickier of a question, but it doesn't say anything about social mediation there. If she's independently following the picture sequence, we can think of that as an engineered environment. Okay, maybe she couldn't have made the sandwich without the pictures. Maybe she's a long way from learning to do it without the pictures, but she didn't need people, and presumably she wanted the sandwich. So good. Overall, call that functional. Sarah reads and follows instructions to advance on a preferred video game. That's interesting, because what's the benefit to society of her advancing on the video game? Not much. We don't care that much. It doesn't help me that she advanced on the video game, but it's important to her, right? It's a leisure interest of hers. And if she can read and follow those instructions, reading here is a functional repertoire for her. Oh, you have to hit, I don't even know video games well enough to imagine what it is. Command Shift left arrow. If you want to have the shortcut to get to this next screen on this video game. So I would call that functional for her. Now, where's my cursor? There we are. Why does it matter? Why do we care if something is functional or not? Because if we fall short of teaching skills to a functional level, those behaviors are likely to fall apart in the real world. Remember, fair enough, our teaching is contrived, right? We're setting up sometimes visual schedules of things we're going to do, and things are in permanent locations, and we offer a lot of support, and we offer a lot of extra reinforcers. We have token systems running. It's all contrived stuff here. And that's fair as we're getting skills started, but we have to remember is we want these skills to live in the real world. They can't be dependent upon things that aren't going to be in the real world. So ultimately, especially as we're getting ready for the next webinar, the last one in our series, preparing to launch, ultimately, we really need to look at what's going to happen to this skill when I'm not here. What's going to happen if they have a babysitter at home or something like that? What would happen with this skill? Okay, if we can recognize that we're not going to be able to teach a skill all the way to a purely functional level, and especially as we get into like later adolescence and we're thinking about someone, maybe not living with his parents and also not living totally independently, then we should be using this information to plan supports that are going to be necessary in those less restrictive environments. Say, okay, we'll have this, but make sure the environment is set up such that there's, let's see, what's a good example of it? There's pictures here showing which shelf is his, and stuff like that. Okay. There's a recipe book. That's a good example. There's a cookbook for how to make different things in the microwave. Because if there's not one, he's going to need us to help. Different people are going to help differently, and the skill is going to fall apart, and he won't be making anything in the microwave. So we want to set up those supports as they're necessary. And as much as possible, we want those supports not to be socially mediated. Again, this is where the cookbook is has a nice advantage over, well, just ask mom and she'll help you do it. Selecting targets is relevant here. I've alluded to this a little bit earlier. Because remember, we want to have functional repertoires maintained by natural reinforcers. Let's see what this is. Because we want the functional repertoires maintained by natural reinforcers, we should start by identifying targets related to currently effective reinforcers, right? So, and earlier I mentioned Lewis sweeping the floor. Let's assume for the sake of argument that he doesn't really care if the floor is clean. So that repertoire is not going to be maintained by a natural reinforcer. That's going to have some impact on our teaching procedures and on how well the skill is going to maintain, right? There's some differences in the procedures we can use when the activity, the outcome of the activity is really relevant to the kid versus when the kid's really doing it for us. It's an expectation. It's a fair one. We're going to hold them to it, but they're doing it for us. There's differences in what we can do in those two that we're going to get into. So for some kids, if they like cartoons, then teaching them how to use the remote for the on-demand, get to the right thing and find the right episode, and that stuff is relevant. That might be a functional thing to teach them how to do. If they like Pop-Tarts, teach them how to make their own Pop-Tart, get their own plate, get their own paper towel. All of that can be a functional thing to do. And we might intentionally select all of those things based on relevant to them first, and then get into the things that are more relevant to us. I'll go out on a limb and suppose that our first kid in that example, washing his hands before the snack, he may not really care if his hands are clean before the snack, but he's learned that we care if his hands are clean before the snack. So what we've done is we've just connected it with, right? Okay, you do want your snack, that's great. And we do want your hands clean, and we have a consistent expectation that your hands are clean before the snack. So it won't be a surprise to you. You'll see it as a logical connection after some time, right? I access the snack, which I do care about, after I do this other thing, which I wouldn't have otherwise cared about. Okay, how do we teach functional repertoires? Step one is we need to know what it takes for any repertoire to be functional. And I'm just going to spend this one moment here talking about manding as an example. That's requesting reinforcers. This isn't the kind of repertoire that people usually use the term functional for, as they usually think about, you know, dressing and hand washing and stuff like that. But you think about asking for a Cheeto when the teacher holds up a Cheeto and asks, what do you want? And then says Cheeto, and the kid says Cheeto and gets a Cheeto. That's intentionally a very early example that I'm giving you, right? I'm looking for, that's pretty clearly not yet functional. It might be appropriate for where you are, but you're not home yet, right? So what will it take for this to end up being functional? Well, let's see. If there's things that you want, but you don't have attention right away, then you would have to get attention in order for someone to hear what you were asking for. Some of our kids, when they don't have your attention, when you're not sitting there looking at them with the Cheeto asking what they want, loosely speaking, they think they're not supposed to ask for anything. Okay, I know this loosely speaking. My BCBA friends wouldn't like that kind of terminology. But if a kid only thinks you can ask for Cheeto when you're asking whether he wants a Cheeto or not, then there's going to be some times that he wants a Cheeto and you're not asking him about it, and he's going to be upset at some level. And that's fine for us to be upset sometimes, but what does he do when he's upset? This could be a problem for us in terms of problem behaviors, in terms of any number of things. But more importantly, the requesting repertoire is falling apart in the real world, because the real world doesn't have continual attention. Please tell me all your wants and needs right now. I'd love to hear them. So for it to be functional, we have to teach that if you don't have someone's attention and there's something that you want or need, you should do something to get their attention. Taking it a step further, it's great if we can teach them to get attention really well. That's one of the parts of the basic learner package. But everyone can't always give their attention right away. If it's a teacher of a bigger class and there's not one-to-one supports, then you might be sharing attention with others. The example I referred to earlier, your parents are on the phone. So if they're on the phone, their attention isn't available right away. So what do you do now? Well, now for it really to be functional, you should remember, loosely speaking, that you wanted the Cheeto when your parent is off the phone, and then you should go and ask for their attention, hey mom, and then you should ask for the Cheeto after that. And you should be patient throughout, right? There's a lot that goes into a Manning repertoire actually being functional. Okay, what would make these things functional? I'm not going to go through in great detail for every one of these, but I just want, it's another way of us planning that we know we need to work on dressing, and we might want to work on writing for a lot of our kids, and maybe not necessarily for all of them. Any of these things are potentially viable things to work on with our kids, right? So for dressing to be functional, well, they need the obvious skills of, if the clothes are in front of them, they put them on in a basically right way, for the most part forward and right side out, and they can do it without needing assistance. They're not afraid for the shirt to come over the head. All of those things, those are the obvious parts, right? Just getting the clothes on without assistance. For it to be functional, you're also finding your clothes where they are in your closet, in your dresser. At some level, if you start caring about how people are viewing you a little bit more, you might care about the coordination between different parts of your outfit a little bit more. And then if you care about how people feel about you, how they're viewing you, and therefore you care about the coordination, then you coordinating the things yourself becomes functional. Okay. Writing. I want to go on this one a little bit more, because writing doesn't necessarily seem like something that's easy to make functional for our kids, right? For us, like, well, writing is like, that's what you have to do for school to show that you comprehended part of a group lesson, or that you comprehended this prose section that you had to read. That's what writing is for. Well, if we think about it from the lens of, when would writing actually benefit our kid, right? Well, let's see, when does it benefit us? Writing benefits us when there's something that we need to remember later, that we might not remember. So we want to make a permanent product. We want to put it somewhere that we're going to see, our own to-do list. I can't forget this. I'm not going to be able to sleep if I think I might forget that I have to do this thing before Thursday. So I better write it down so I can relax a little bit there. Now I know it's there. And when I have a moment, I'll check on this list, and then good, my writing will have paid off. So writing is not necessarily just something that's academic. It doesn't have to be, but it would be incumbent upon us to arrange, to sequence activities for our kids where not only are they able to write independently, legibly, right? Quickly enough so it doesn't take all day, legibly enough so that they can read it themselves, right? All of those things, and then also be about relevant content that is of personal interest to them, or potentially something that we require them to be accountable for later on. So it is going to be a comprehension question. You don't really necessarily care about the answer, but I reward correct responding in a general way. So later on, if you have this written down, you'll be able to respond correctly. Whereas if you don't have it written down, you won't be able to respond correctly. This gets a little bit more into generating targets based upon our learners' interests. And this is part of why I went a little bit longer on the writing example on the previous slide. When we started with Addie, he was 5 or 6, I believe, and had a number of challenges that were fairly easily overcome. Before that time, he hadn't done any work with reading or writing. He had no primer skills in either reading or writing. After some time, one of the things we did was begin to make reinforcer menus. And he was just beginning to emerge reading, but we set up not just to work on phonics, but first to work on, here's words that matter to you, like ride in car, and different treats, and use the pool, and iPad, stuff like that. So we're writing these down, and we're having him interact with these when he wants the iPad. Okay, which one do you want? The iPad. Okay, great. Touch the word iPad. So we're teaching him the reading in the context of getting the things he wants, making it functional, making it relevant in that way. after some experience with reading a menu and some experience with some basic components of writing, can you trace this word, can you copy this word, just a little bit of practice. Addy shows in this next video that he's actually able to remember how to write riding car himself, and he wants to, right? He's happy to do it because he's making his own reinforcement menu. So we're connecting our reinforcement system with functional reading because the reading is related to what he's getting at the time, right? It's relevant to him. And since we're doing reading, it fits perfectly with writing because you can read the things that you wrote. Yay, all right, they all build upon each other. This is what we want to do. We want to build these webs.
Good.
Nice.
Take that. All right,
Awesome.
let's see.
Yeah, really happy with that. Actually writes just as well as I do. But also one of the points I'll make about this sometimes is that we want confidence from our learners when they're doing newer things like this, maybe a little bit sloppily, is not the time for us to come and say, hold on, let's look at that A, mister, let's fix the E and the A, let's try this again. This needs to pay off. We're greasing the wheel. This is the first time he ever wrote that. And it's tremendous for someone who is the first time he ever wrote that. As you could probably tell from his affect, he's quite happy to do it. So confidence first, flow, and finding a cursor. There we go. It's not what I wanted. Here we go. Okay, how do we teach? Excuse me. Functional repertoires. The basic instructional recommendations that you've probably been taught from other sources still remain, right? So we're not changing the fact that we're breaking down some skills, right? Here's how you grip a marker. Here's how you make the stroke. Here's how you copy a B, stuff like that are certainly parts of what we're doing. Providing thoughtful prompting. Later on, we're going to talk a lot more about what makes thoughtful prompting. You know, I'm a process guy. There's a lot that matters, not in just what we're teaching, but the how we're teaching it really matters. And we still want to primarily use positive reinforcement, of course. We want to fade prompts. All of those basic things still apply, but there's going to be some more details we're going to get into. Okay, why am I referring to this now as important parts of the basic learner package instead of just a reminder that we want to be working on the basic learner package? Here's why, and this will sound, maybe it'll be a little bit surprising to you, is that the more strength our learner has developed in all of these elements of the basic learner package, the better, clearly. The more socially interested they are and all of that, the better that is for us overall. When it comes to things like Lewis learning to sweep the floor and John learning to do his laundry, things like that, we can teach that without our kids necessarily craving our attention, having social approaches. They don't necessarily have to love playing games with us in order to learn those other bits. We can teach those more through competence building, through familiarity and just good, careful teaching procedures. What is important, though, are the ones that are bolded. There will be sometimes we'll want to have some prompts so that, yeah, we can have that be a big turnoff or a big sore spot for our learner. Some level of cooperation with teachers is important still. And the other one I haven't really emphasized much yet was the endurance. All right, so if you contrast, endurance just means what we think it means, right? So someone able to walk 20 steps it's not nothing, but running 3 miles is very different. The latter takes a lot more endurance. With our learners, if we think about them doing discrete trial kinds of table work, put the wagon with the wagon, touch your head, stuff like that, there's generally one teacher expectation statement, there's one response, there's some kind of feedback, and then our learner is tending to, if they're learning well, they're being agreeable, then they're waiting for the next expectation statement from the teacher. But what they're not doing is building their attention span for recruiting their next cue themselves. They're not, in that example, even doing something like an 8-piece puzzle where they get one piece in and they're naturally looking for the next one and persevering a little bit for where it's going to go and naturally going to the next one and not losing their focus or running out of juice before completing the puzzle. So I was looking for an exception to this, but I don't think there is an exception. When we get into skills being functional, they're going to be bigger skills. They're going to be multiple responses in a row. And there's going to be some things they're going to have to pay attention to in the environment. So it is going to require some endurance beyond the level of, here's one cue, give me one response. So that becomes a much more important part. Excuse me. Okay. So we want to start off, we found something we want to teach. Let's just say it's the, and I blew my nose and made it bleed. Not ideal. We want to then establish a flow. We want to help enough to allow the activity to progress smoothly. Flow is, of course, a loose word, but we're really trying to get with that is we want the steps all to link together. If we're looking at this as a behavioral chain, we need the steps linked together. So if it were us asking the student, okay, where does your backpack go? And they don't respond quickly to that, then we're losing a flow by them walking in, taking the backpack off, dropping it on the floor and going to look out the window. Okay, so now we have a bigger gap in between the removal of the backpack and then putting the backpack where it goes. We don't have a flow. So if we want to get a flow, we need that support to be much more timely. So we get them over by their hook before we get the backpack off. Or the moment they get the backpack off, we get it in their hand, we say, great, put it on the hook. Instead of asking where it goes, instead of waiting 5 seconds to see if they're going to figure out where it goes by themselves. So in the early stages, we're not presumptuous, we're just generous. We just want to make this smooth. We might not be asking questions of a lot of learners unless they've already proven that they learn really easily that way. Until they've proven that, when you're establishing flow, let your general guideline be, don't ask the questions. Just get them moving with the next thing. Some of the time, we want to actually just do a step for our learner instead of helping him. Yeah, I mistyped this. I'm sorry about that. Don't look at what I wrote. Listen to what I say. We're going to do some of the steps for the learner instead of getting him to do those, right? Helping him, meaning like prompting him to do those steps. So we're not saying, here, give me your hand, let's put this on the hook. We're instead maybe having him give it to us right by his cubby, and then we're putting it on the hook for him. Or later on, we have the example of making a Pop-Tart. We get the Pop-Tart in the toaster and we press the toaster down for him. Okay, so we're saving him the trouble of being prompted through all of the steps. We want to lean primarily on modeling and narration. So we're doing steps, maybe where the backpack and Pop-Tart examples don't work great in this one. That's if a 2-part toaster, we're putting in Pop-Tart on each side, that works well. So I might model on putting my Pop-Tart in one part of the toaster and giving him the chance to put his Pop-Tart in the other part of the toaster based upon imitating me. I'm narrating, I'm going to put my Pop-Tart here. I'm not asking him, where are you going to put your Pop-Tart? I'm not telling him, put your Pop-Tart there. I'm not taking his hand on his Pop-Tart and say, here, put your Pop-Tart here. I'm trying to see, will it go along with this really timely modeling and narration? And we let our learner experience the benefits of the completion of the activity. We made a sandwich, great, he gets to eat the sandwich. That would be true theoretically if our learner did a really nice job of observing us make the sandwich entirely by ourselves. But he wasn't just engaged in self-stimulatory behavior or scripting or playing on an iPad or something like that while we made a sandwich. We're not, there's no accomplishment there, right? Theoretically, if the very early stages could just be, he's watching us make the sandwich, watching it pretty well, we're narrating, we can see that he's attending, great, and he's eating a sandwich. Is if that goes well, we had a flow, and he's seeing the payoff at the end. The next day, the next week, I want him handing me the butter knife, I want him getting the bread, I want him getting a plate. 1 or 2, maybe 3 additional steps at a time, so that it's none of it's overwhelming, but we're keeping the flow. We don't want it to turn into, in the early stages, that we tried something, a target that was a low probability of success. That, okay, I'm waiting for you to get the knife. You know what you're supposed to get. You know it, get the knife. And have that actually not happen for 30 seconds, there goes the flow. And probably there goes your student's investment in the sandwich making the next time you're going to do it, right? That's what we're interested in here. What is our student going to take from today's event that's going to impact how he participates tomorrow? What's he going to do tomorrow that's better or worse, depending upon how successful this was for him? In the early parts, touch the success band, contact the reinforcement for this so that you're more invested tomorrow. We want to be continuously monitoring our students' effort. Ideally, we begin to develop a good feel for this, right? That's a loose phrase again, and when adjusting our supports accordingly. So for me, I could feel if a kid is helping me, we're coloring pictures together. Let's just take a totally different example. I think that she might be interested in the picture ending up looking nice, so she can show her mom, great, we're coloring the picture together. It's a good time. When my student begins kind of looking away, maybe just sort of coloring repeatedly in the same place, just kind of peeling at the crayon, something like that, I'm thinking, I don't feel like she's on my team as much, right? Is she really still interested in coloring this picture? Because I'm not coloring it for myself, and I wanted to help her color it. So I will help less, or I might check, like, do you really want to finish this picture, or are you kind of done with it, right? That's adjusting my supports accordingly. I'll say, oh no, you really do want to finish. Okay, cool. Well, then what do you think about helping with the hair over here or something like that? Now that monitoring a student's effort doesn't come naturally to everyone. And sometimes, especially with newer teachers, it's helpful to objectively measure the actual number of teacher responses versus student responses to see who's working harder. In this case, it's very helpful to have a second observer do it and say, okay, do you realize that you guys making that Pop-Tart, just one Pop-Tart for him, that you had like 11 responses and he had 2. Okay, so that's, you were working a lot harder than him. Unless you're in the very, very early stages of building flow, we have to consider whether he's really interested enough for you to proceed. One of the broad lessons we're trying to teach our kids as early as possible, but also throughout their career, is that we're helping them as they're helping themselves. Admittedly, this is pretty deep for something we're trying to cover in just one part of one slide. So I'll apologize for that, but it comes down to a couple of things. So let's assume, for sake of this argument, that we have selected targets relevant to this learner. I'll stick with the Pop-Tart example. Okay, John does like Pop-Tarts. Good, we have that established. It is the right time of day. He is hungry. He's used to having Pop-Tarts for breakfast. Good, everything's in order. Motivation is there. Okay, so we've made Pop-Tarts before. He's been around close enough that when the Pop-Tart pops up, I said, hey, it's ready. And he has looked and approached for this plate, and I've taken it and put it on his plate. We've had that happen. Okay, good. So now we have this history, we have this level of expectation. Now what happens today for the first time? He leaves the area while the Pop-Tart's toasting and it pops. And I look and I see, did he notice the sound of the pop? Oh no, he didn't notice the sound of the pop. I wait a little while, wait 3 to 5 seconds. Hey, your Pop-Tart's done. And he's maybe distracted with something else now. If he's distracted with something else, my question to myself is, how badly does he want the Pop-Tart, right? That's one part of it. And it's not that I'm not trying to sound like I'm being very difficult here, but I do want to caution against something. So if I think he might not really want the Pop-Tart that much, if he's giving me less today than he gave me yesterday for the Pop-Tart, that is his Pop-Tart, then should I put in more effort on my part when he's putting in less effort on his part so that he can get something he maybe wants? Or maybe he doesn't want the Pop-Tart as much today as he wanted it yesterday, or he wants this other thing more than the Pop-Tart. So maybe I'm not doing any good by, hey, come on, you really want the Pop-Tart. Maybe he doesn't, right? If he does pretty much want the Pop-Tart, he's not passionate about it, obviously, or he would have been closer. If he does pretty much want the Pop-Tart, what I don't want to do is teach, you just do whatever you want to do and you will end up with a Pop-Tart. I want to teach instead, if you really like Pop-Tarts, you should become alert to the popping of the toaster. You should be like, oh, thank goodness, the toaster has popped, my Pop-Tart is ready, right? That should be a big thing for you. You should be anticipating that. You should be nearby and notice that on your own. So some of the time, I will allow my student to miss out on his Pop-Tart for a while and let him do what he's doing in the other room for a while. And I might even eventually transition him to another activity with a Pop-Tart still sitting in the toaster for a while. In that case, if he really did want it, his lack of effort will have not paid off, right? Because I didn't help him because he wasn't helping himself. And maybe 10 minutes later, he's going to be like, yeah, I wanted that Pop-Tart. It's like, oh, you want to try to make a Pop-Tart again? Sure, we can totally do that. This one's kind of cold, but we can toast it. He's 10 minutes hungrier or 15 minutes hungrier now. And also he's got this one lesson of, well, Steve doesn't really work super hard to come and get my attention to make sure I'm getting the Pop-Tart, right? I know I'm going on a long time on this example, but it's kind of hard for people to understand. Our goal is not, let's make sure he gets his Pop-Tart. Our goal is, let's teach him to be as attentive as he can be, to put in the effort that he can, so that he's learning to rely upon himself as much as possible, as much as is reasonable for his current level of functioning. Okay, following your data. So like I said, I don't want to sound like I'm being too much of a tough guy on that. We don't jump into week one, okay, you're just going to be totally without breakfast because you left the area while it was getting cooked. We're not doing that. But we use our data to make judgments as to whether we're going to be raising the bar some more, which, as you can tell, I like to do in these circumstances, or whether we're going to have to take a step back because it's just not practical not to. So on the 12th, it took us 75 seconds overall to try to make the Pop-Tart, and we didn't end that in success. It ended in a failure. Got it in the toaster, but he left and he didn't come back. Okay. A little bit later, 10 or 15 minutes later, tried it again. And this time I waited longer after it popped. And eventually, yes, he came back and noticed that it was ready and got it on his own. So that's a good lesson for me. Maybe I just need to wait longer and not, end the opportunity so early, or not remind him so soon. The next day, the first try took 110 seconds. And I judged by the fact that he was engaged in more self-stimulatory behavior, right? He was busier with something else. He did not look like a kid who was about to remember his Pop-Tart was ready, loosely speaking again. So no, we ended that one in failure, put it away. And that's how we ended it. A little bit later, he remembered that he wanted the Pop-Tart, so we tried it again. And this time it took 45 seconds to get the Pop-Tart from where it was and put it in the toaster. And then he didn't end up pressing down the toaster to depress the Pop-Tart inside. So that represents actual regression. He's actually doing worse than he was on previous times. So maybe, and this is part of the art of this, maybe I've given him a little too much failure in out of those last overall 3 or 4 times. And if there's a little too much failure, he's a little bit less invested, right? So maybe the next time I'll be a little bit more helpful than I was those other times. I use the word maybe a lot. We're just tracking. We want to have some challenges. I'm not deterred by the opportunity for some of these to end in failures. That actually is helpful when we're teaching real perseverance, real functional repertoires for kids. Some of these probably should be failures. We just can't be the tough guy expecting that they're going to pull themselves up by the bootstraps in big and consistent ways. We just see whether our challenges are paying off or not. Okay, here's an example of us trying to ambitiously fade supports. I'm just going to show a little bit of this video. This is Mel and Addie again, and she's established with him, that she can have some pretty firm expectations, and he's become pretty malleable. He'll accept corrections and a number of things from her. His basic learner package is well intact. Here we've chosen a target. One of the things he likes to eat is quesadillas, as a lot of us do, and so we're teaching him how to make a quesadilla. He has previously learned to get a plate first, and in this particular occasion, he's not getting a plate first. So Mel is, instead of errorlessly prompting and saying, go get a plate, she's allowing some failures, giving him a little bit of a chance to try to figure this out on his own.
What do you mean? We'll then go get one. You know, it's on place. It's really not swap system. That's really weird. She told me 50.
Oh, 15?
One. She said about 0. 2. 3.
There we go. So I like some of the flexibility Mel's showing here. It's hard to script exactly step by step when to correct, when to block, when to ask an indirect question like, what do you need? In this case, he's made a quesadilla several times, so he does know to answer plate. And when he answers plate, he also knows where the plates are. He knows to go and get it by himself, come back, put it where it goes. He's motivated to proceed. She knows that opening the Ziploc, not the Ziploc, the cheese bag that locks together, she knows that's going to be a better chance of either spilling the cheese on the floor because it's hard to open, or it's going to take him a longer time to do, and it's a lower probability, newer skill. So she's happy to help with that part. So there's times to support more, there's times to support less. She's one bit of proof in the pudding here that it's working the right way is that he's remaining attentive to her. As she's opening the cheese, he's right there, focused on what she's doing, watching how she's doing it, very ready to get the cheese out. This is where some of that endurance comes in, some of that attention span. If our kids have not begun to learn some more complex behaviors, some like these 7 steps go in a row, if they haven't begun to learn some of those and they've only done, here's a cue, here's your response, then we need to establish, even if it's just putting pegs in a pegboard, something that gets their attention span up to be focused on this one activity for this amount of time. Again, it's easier with things usually that are of interest to the student. So what Mel did at the beginning with the plate, with him not having the plate, is an example of what I call productive floundering. Sorry to make up so many terms, but there's like a plain English term. I use productive floundering to describe the practice of allowing a learner to try and fail on his own until he finds a way to be more successful. this can provide a really big jump. It's an ambitious move. You can't do this with someone who is intolerant of delays, intolerant of corrections, right? Intolerant of failures. They need some pretty good tolerance and some pretty good endurance to do this. There already has to be a flow with the activity, has to be an investment in getting to the end, right? Some rapport built between the two of you before you can do this. So like I said, it's an ambitious move. Don't just jump in and do it with everyone. But what I learned with a lot of learners is the attempt to plan errorless teaching, generous prompting, and then just fading the prompts is sometimes limited. Sometimes they're not going to let you fade the prompts all the way without them making errors. And then if we just follow those errors with a simple, oh, here, do it this way, their, loosely speaking again, their attention and thoughtful effort gets stuck. They plateau at a level that tells us, if they had a self-narrative going on, it's, I can just kind of go along with this activity at some level and Mel's going to make sure it works. So I'll just at some level go through the motions and Mel will make sure it works. And we're doing the productive floundering approach is, no, we're going to snap you out of that dream. That's you're snapped out of that. You're going to have to be thoughtful in some of the things that you do, or it's not going to work. Right. So you have to be very thoughtful about how you use productive floundering as well. But it's a tremendous way to teach kids that they're accountable for their own outcomes. What about activities of personal disinterest? Right. So doing the laundry. I told you we would get to this. Laundry is a functional repertoire, right? Is a daily living thing. It can be functional when we get it to the right level. My laundry basket is full. I'm out of clothes in the dresser. It's time. There's a smell. There's going to be company, whatever it is. Excuse me again. This is where it's going to be particularly helpful. So Louis didn't want to sweep the floor. John doesn't want to do his laundry. They don't necessarily dislike it, but they have no reason that said, whoa, I'm really into doing laundry. So let's assume that he doesn't want to do his laundry. This is where having a general good teacher-student relationship of, Mel said to do this stuff, and that tends to work out. If I put in good effort, it tends to work out in some reasonable amount of time. Plus, if I don't put in good effort, it doesn't work out as well, right? I don't get to go to whatever my next stuff is going to be as quickly because I didn't do as well with this. I didn't earn as many tokens. I still have this job hanging over my head before we go to ride in the car, something like that. It's generally a good idea to be going along. One of the things that helps with this also, expanding upon the value of endurance at this stage, is not just having okay, you can do the 8-piece puzzle, that's good, or you can do table work for a while, you can do this chore or that chore, is that we can begin taking these activities and having those be chunks within schedules that are not necessarily independent completion schedules. Here, do this whole schedule by yourself and tell me when you're done with the whole thing. But this is a schedule of events to come that some of which we'll do together and some you're going to do by yourself. But this will tell us, you know, where we're going with this. And you might know that at the very end of a 3 to 5 step schedule that might take us 10 to 30 minutes to do, we're going to be going to the pool or going to the movie or something like that. A great way to build in, why do you want to do laundry? Yeah, because it's the next thing on the schedule. And I know that means that thing has to be done. And I also know that schedules are fine things. I don't dislike schedules. We also want to think about when we get into something like the laundry, especially things that are less personally relevant to the kids. In addition to productive floundering, we want to distinguish between resets and redirections. So in the redirection, a learner either gets off task, makes an error of some kind, and we come and we say, oops, here, do it like this. Or what were you supposed to be doing? Get back on it, do it like this, right? Redirections and corrections, I guess, would be a better way to describe this. But both of those can be distinguished from a reset. In a reset, we're backing our kid up at least a couple of steps in the chain. Sometimes if it's not a humongous chain that we're working on, we might back them up to the beginning of the chain. Here, why don't you just try that again? And part of the scientific reason we want to do this is we don't want broken chains, right? We got link 1 in the chain, good. Went with link 2, okay, good. Then there was a break in the chain. Engaged in self-stim, made a thoughtless mistake, put the dirty clothes on top of wet clothes in the washer. That was one that it took us some time to figure out for one of my kids. And then we go on here, let's take that out and move these over here. Okay, now get back to what you're doing. Because there's a break between link 2 and link 3, those aren't linked together. There's no longer a flow. We shouldn't expect this, the laundry repertoire to become functional because it hasn't been linked together yet. So that's a good reason to go back and say, why don't you start at the beginning? And another reason for this, besides just these need to be linked together, what I've seen is relevant for some kids is it costs a little bit more in the effort. You've already invested some amount of effort, and maybe it wasn't as much as you needed to. You need to be a little bit more thoughtful before step 3, link 3 in the chain. You should have checked to see if there was wet clothes in there, but you didn't. You weren't thoughtful. So go back and reinvest the effort of link 1 and link 2 and see if you remember that link 3. And in some cases, we've had to have my kid practice this a couple of times before he's like, you know what, I think I better put in the effort, or I might be putting in a lot more effort in order to get this whole thing done. At some level, I need to raise my game and be more thoughtful. Okay, thank you, Card, and thank you everyone for participating in this webinar. To obtain a certificate of completion, you must fill out the form at the certificate of completion link provided on the email for this training. Please write down this code as it will be required to receive the certificate. WAR 222021. The code is WAR 222021. In summary, we learned today that functional really means that a skill will stand up to the tests of the real world. And this ultimately is part of our job, right? To not develop skills in a vacuum that fall apart, but that evolve into more complex skills and survive the tests of the real world well. It does, of course, include things like your basic living skills. We also noticed that if we've identified truly functional targets, especially targets that are relevant from the learner's perspective, we can and should systematically and eventually ambitiously hold them accountable for his successes. And this can be done through all the kinds of examples that we talked about of, you can notice when your Pop-Tart is done, you can figure out how to plug in the vacuum, some of those kinds of things. These can be your job as you learn that you're not going to be rescued all the time, that we're not a crutch that is going to rescue with everything. If you care about an outcome, then we can help you learn that you're accountable for that outcome. And then your skill will be more functional. We've come full circle. Thank you everyone again for attending. Please contact FAU Card 561-297-2055. card@fau.edu, www.autism.fau.edu. Thanks again.